Halito, Sahochafoyet, Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, Choctaw Sia Hoke. Hi, my name is Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, and I am Choctaw. I'm a tribal member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I'm a digital course creator at fictioncourses.com, where I help writers become confident authors. I'm the creator of Fiction Writing American Indians that equips authors to confidently be able to write Native American characters in their stories. Today I want to talk about the Marvel series that came out at the beginning of 2024, centering on the superhero character Echo. You may have seen this or you may not have. I have not. I did learn at the latter part of 2023 that the series had actually made Echo a young Choctaw woman. So there's been a lot of talk in the different communities, writing communities, and in the Choctaw Nation communities that I'm in about the series, the pros and cons of it. So I wanted to present this especially for authors who are considering a tribe that they want to include in their stories or really feature in their stories, and some of the pitfalls that I felt Marvel did fall into when creating this story. So wanted to say first off about working with culture keepers, which is something I encourage authors to do when they're writing Native characters, to make those connections with the communities. And that's something that I appreciate Marvel doing. They did reach out to the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma and worked with people in the language department and different culture departments, the Choctaw Nation Cultural Center in Durant. I'm not sure what happened with some of the communications, though. I know in one clip there were some errors in the pronunciation of the Choctaw language, which surprised me. A word for Choctaw warrior was mispronounced. So, and that's such a prominent word, of course, for Marvel and for Echo being a warrior and being a superhero. So something to remember for novelists. It's really important to get we don't have so much the pronunciation, but the spelling of Native words. Even when you're copying and pasting, sometimes those microscopic details can be lost, and so you lose that in the translation of your story. So that's really important to note when you're writing. The other thing is misconceptions. There are so many stereotypes and misconceptions about Native people around the world, really, that people around the world have these misconceptions about who Native people are and what they believe, what their cultural practices are, what our history is. And one thing that Marvel did with Echo is they put this large sun patch on her jacket, one of the jackets that she wore, and to my knowledge, they never explained that sun patch. The only reason why I even really noted it is one of the reviewers who is big in the Marvel universe, which I will say I'm not a superhero movie watcher series. I'm not into the Marvel comics or the DC universe, all of those things. So I'm coming in at pretty unknowledgeable on that perspective, other than what I know in pop culture and from friends that I've talked to. So I did go watch some reviews and someone who is well versed in the Marvel series, all the series that Marvel's creating. Her comment about the sun patch, she wondered what it was and what that symbolism was. So she started looking up Choctaw and sun, and she came across a very predominant misconception about Choctaws in that we were sun worshipers prior to European contact. It's not stated that Choctaws were sun worshipers, but that just having the patch on there led her down that road to assume that Choctaws are sun worshipers. And I don't know how many people may have come to that same conclusion, did that research that she did, very on the surface. So had she been able to go deeper, and if there was more information about this, or had she possibly read my books, she would know that Choctaws were not sun worshipers. And the Biskinik in March of 2024 actually just published an article about this with the solar eclipse in April of 2024 and what Choctaws felt, how they felt about eclipses, what we do have from oral history and written history about what Choctaws believed about the sun and eclipses. It's a really great article if you want to go look up our tribal newspaper, the Biskinik. The article is online, March 2024, and it does a really good job of conveying that history and the studies and how the Choctaws saw the sun as God's eye, as the Creator's eye. And this is also something I've received from an elder who was Mississippi Choctaw, who came to Oklahoma, where he was told that the Choctaws believed that the Creator, that God, lived behind the sun, and that the sun was his eye to watch his creation. And so when the missionaries came and were asking the Choctaws if they believed, they were trying to communicate with them if they believed in a superior being or in a creator, and they would point to the sun. And that's where the misconception way back a couple hundred or more years ago began, that the Choctaws were sun worshipers. But there's no evidence, historical, archaeological, or oral tradition to indicate that the Choctaws were sun worshipers. So that's not something specifically on for Marvel, because they didn't state that they were sun worshipers, but just having that patch on there, and I don't know if that was from their own research or what the significance was of having the sun patch, but it did lead one reviewer down that road. So if you're going to have symbolism in your stories, one, really do that research, make sure it's correct, get multiple sources, primary sources, work with the tribe if you can, and really make sure that it's accurate, and then that explained clearly in your story what that symbolism is, so that people don't go down the wrong road and assume incorrect information about the tribe or the nation that you're writing about. So misconceptions, really, really important. You want to be clear in your writing. Mismatched values is something else I wanted to cover. Because of the rating of Echo being TV mature versus TV 14, like the Hawkeye series, when Echo is introduced as a character in the Marvel universe. So it was a TV 14 rating. So they really ramped up the violence in Echo in that series, and some reviewers said it wasn't violent enough, there wasn't enough blood. Anyway, but just watching the trailer, watching the clips, and the mature rating, it was a much higher level of violence in this particular series. And I know a lot of people were commenting on that. There were people within the Choctaw Nation commenting on that, which is one of the things that caught my attention, because violence doesn't align with Choctaw history and culture. And of course, anyone of any race, any ethnicity can have more violent tendencies than another. We're talking about individual people. But since violence is such a strong theme in Echo's life, why did they choose Choctaw to represent to her background? Our motto, our tribal motto is faith, family, and culture. So we're very centered on those elements with everything we do, and because it's tied closely to our history. And Choctaws were warriors and are warriors, still serving in the military. So there's definitely that element there. I have period violence in my books with shootouts and fistfights and all of those things, but it just felt like, with our history and culture, violence is never glorified. And so even though we're warriors, even though that is a part of our history and our past, it's not something that's glorified. Also with the violence, it felt like bait and switch for one of my friends, because she did watch the Hawkeye TV series, and to see it ramped up so much in Echo, she actually decided not to watch it because of that. So Echo was presented in one way in Hawkeye and presented in another way once they did her own TV series. So that's something to be aware of as a novelist, especially if you're doing an ongoing series, you're writing in an ongoing universe, story world. make sure you're being consistent so that when readers come in at the beginning of the series, they're getting the same flavor of story at the end. So keeping the level of violence and all of those things consistent, so that readers and in their case viewers to know what they're getting. So that again, with them ramping up the element of violence, just had me, pondering that, that they made this character Choctaw, and even having her native. So that was just something that I was more concerned about with their portrayal. The last thing I want to cover is mythical beings. In some of the clips that I saw, and then in watching reviewers' videos on the series, there is this supernatural element that is woven through the character of Echo and through her mother and her grandmother. And one reviewer was a bit surprised because we have superheroes and they have superpowers, but supernatural is apparently something that the Marvel Universe doesn't normally delve into. So it was more of a supernatural element rather than superpower. I guess the supernatural element was her superpower, which, if that's the case, more plays into the stereotype of Native people being these supernatural beings rather than human beings. And so I doubt it was intentional, but in doing that, and when we do that with our stories, we're actually dehumanizing Native people. So rather than them being just normal human beings like any other race or ethnic background, it puts them in this, it elevates them to this supernatural being state, which is actually making them not human. So that was a big concern that I had with Echo and with them choosing to do that. Also, I believe it's in the opening sequence. They portray the Choctaw origin story, which we have that in our cultural center, the origin stories, some of the origin stories, which we have a couple of them with Choctaw people. But the opening sequence is basically the emergence from the cave, the sacred cave, which I've actually been there in Mississippi. It's a sacred site, and also our sacred mound there in Mississippi. It's not open to public access, but because my mother and I were Choctaw, we were able to go to those sites. And so there is the origin story of the Choctaws. They're emerging from the earth. And so with Echo, they portray them as, just being solid, covered in mud. Some people thought it was body paint, but I'm assuming it was based on what I was seeing, and it breaking apart would have been the mud that's in our background, which is another thing. There was a lot of culture that they put in there, but because it wasn't explained, a lot of people were left to wonder what it meant. I think it created more confusion rather than educating people on some of our history and culture and oral story traditions. The other thing that it did, in the way that they shot it had a very Avatar-ish feel. It felt, which I have not seen Avatar, but it had a very feel of Avatar, where it's, again, going back to mythical beings and not really having human origins. So that's something to just be careful of when you're doing origin stories. Again, they worked with the Choctaw Nation, but with what the general public and worldwide, with stereotypes and misconceptions that people have of natives, it's just, you have to be really careful with that, because we are often seen as these mythical beings with this mythical past that is not rooted in Earth history. So it's almost gave it this alien feel, and that Choctaws were almost this alien people, which, if you're just telling the origin story and you're fully explaining it and all, would probably not have that feeling so much. But the way I saw the opening sequence portray it, that was my concern with it having that mythical being feel, where Choctaws are not real people, but more of being mythical. So those are just some brief thoughts on the Echo series. They're just going to go ahead and stop here, because just as again, a tribal member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I've spent many years researching our history and culture and speaking with elders, just wanted for you as an author to understand some of these pitfalls. Even when we're doing our research and doing the stories, these are specifically 3 things I think you can watch out for, even when you're working with culture keepers, watching out for those misconceptions and the mismatched values and mythical beings. So maybe that was 4 things. But I wanted to make those points for you as an author to help you become a better writer and be more confident when you're telling and writing stories that feature Native American characters. I hope this was helpful. Be sure, if you haven't, check out fictioncourses.com/American Indians, and that's where you'll find my digital course where I go really in depth on things that you can do and aspects that you can tackle when you're writing Native stories to tell the most accurate, authentic stories possible. So we don't have a word for goodbye in the Choctaw language. We say, Chapisalaachiki. I will see you again soon.